Zernona Clayton is a civil rights activist who worked alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Clayton moved to Atlanta in 1965 after taking a job with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. She also traveled with Coretta Scott King during concert tours. She's the first Black person to have her own TV show, a corporate executive for Turner Broadcasting for nearly 3 decades. Clayton is the founder, president, and CEO of the Trumpet Awards Foundation Incorporated and creator and executive producer of the Trumpet Awards Show, which honors the accomplishments of Black Americans. The city of Atlanta honored Clayton with the dedication of a street and park plaza for a lifetime of contributions to humanity. I'm Atlanta City Council member Jennifer Ide. The legacy lives.
We know you and your patients have a lot of questions about the global outbreak of COVID-19, better known as the coronavirus.
Atlanta child psychiatrist Dr. Patrice Harris was the first Black woman elected to serve as president of the American Medical Association. I spoke with her about coronavirus and its impact on our nation.
Are you encouraged by those additional vaccines that may come online, and then in particular the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which seems to have far less efficacy? How do you convince people who may say, okay, maybe it has a better outcome as relates to death, severe disease or death? However, its percentage is much lower than that of the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccination. How do you convince them when we're already running short and it may be the only one available for a time? What do you say to those folks who are first and foremost nervous about it, especially when you're hearing reports of people having problems after the second immunization or people dying from it? How do you keep that support in favor of the vaccination given these, although low incidents still occur, these incidences still occur?
So let me first start with me. I have received my first dose about 3 weeks ago, and I'm scheduled for my second dose this week. So I want to start there to make sure that folks know I do believe in leading by example. It's the message, but it's also the messenger, but it's also the actions of the messenger. So I have received, again, my first dose, and will be receiving my second dose later this week. Yeah, so after the first dose, my arm was sore, and that was it. So my arm was sore about 48 hours, started to get better after that, and that was it. Now, we do know that people do have side effects more often after the second dose, where they're, have a little bit of fever, fatigue, don't feel well, like a flu. But I can tell you that when you weigh, a couple of days of not feeling well to saving one's life, for me, I look at dying from this disease versus a couple of days of not feeling well. For me, it's an easy decision.
Several variants of the virus have been discovered in the United Kingdom, South Africa, and Brazil. Both Pfizer and Moderna say a booster may be necessary, and they're working on one. Dr. Harris says she's encouraged by this.
That is good news, that we are identifying early, are able to identify the science and able to be able to develop additional booster shots as they may be needed. We all should be receiving a tetanus booster every 10 years, right? I don't know about you, but, I had a tetanus shot years ago. I think when I first came to Atlanta and came to train at Emory, and we had to make sure that our immunizations were up to date. That's not a foreign concept that we sometimes need a booster shot.
As for the mental health of our children, many of whom have been somewhat isolated, and they're being educated remotely, Dr. Harris says there's no question that they're still dealing with stress, anxiety, and depression. She encourages parents to find ways to break from screen time and take learning outside. She also promotes the idea of families staying connected in a way that maximizes safety.
You could say, all right, I really want to see you, so we're going to not go anywhere for 10 days, and you're not going to go anywhere for 10 days, and then we're going to do stuff and then do that and then go back. So, I say be creative, but try to stay within the boundaries of what we know decreases risk.
The Atlanta Police Department saw major change in 1948 when it hired its first black police officers. Soon to come along in its ranks in 1950 was Claude Everett Mundy. While responding to a burglary on January 5, 1961, on Parkway Drive, Officer Mundy became the first black officer to be shot and killed in the line of duty. Officer Mundy was 39 years old and left behind a wife and 5 children. He was recently honored with a proclamation during the 60th commemoration of his death. His family was there celebrating his life and his undeniable bravery. I'm Atlanta City Council member Michael Julian Bond. The legacy lives.
The Atlanta City Council approves legislation amending the city's Code of Ordinances to clarify alcohol license requirements for reporting food and alcohol sales at annual renewal and update the mandatory penalties for due cause findings of violations. The legislation aims to address nuisance properties and activities that are considered threats to public health and safety and ensure that establishments licensed as restaurants are operating in accordance with license requirements. The Council says yes to legislation requiring a minimum of 33% of net revenue collected for school zone speed camera enforcement remitted to the city be used towards surveillance cameras and license plate readers citywide, and that a minimum of 33% of fund allocations be used toward constructing or improving the city's public safety training facility. The ordinance is companion legislation to a resolution adopted during the Council's January 19th meeting to approve an agreement with Atlanta Public Schools for the school bus stop arm camera enforcement program and authorize the collection and sharing of fines resulting from offenses. The Council greenlights a resolution expressing support for the strategy of the CDC's public health approach to violence, which is characterized by its emphasis on prevention and its strong conviction that violent behavior and its consequences can be prevented over time, and to express support for the CDC's strategy to build and strengthen partnerships with the public and private sectors and at all levels of government to effectively address the multiple forms of violence. The Council approves a resolution requesting that the chief judges of the Superior Courts of Fulton and DeKalb counties share information with the City of Atlanta on how they've adapted court functions to resume operations with the challenges of COVID-19. For more recently approved legislation, please visit our website, citycouncil.atlantagA.gov. This has been your Atlanta City Council Legislative Minute.
Some of these individuals, these young men, 20 years old, facing 77 years, aggravated assault and having a weapon in their hand, and some of these crimes just triple and double. And these individuals have had to serve time, but they're in a program, a mentoring program like the Next Level Boys Academy that's changing their lives, that shows them there's a better way, and they don't have to do these things anymore, and that they can take life in their own hands by going out there and learning how to cut grass, get a job, and they're better for it. Their wants and their needs are now known. So they don't have to go after things that they want and taking it from someone else. They can go after the things that they need, work hard for it, and keep working to get the things that they want. This is now a wonderful thing. And here at the gathering spot, they gave us the space, the opportunity to do it. And at the end of it, they're even offering some of these young men jobs. And some of the business community needed to hear that because they can also continue to offer these young men jobs. And that's one thing that's going on here. And that's why we wanted to do it, to show that there's a pathway out of poverty, and there's a pathway out of some of these poor choices that young men make. And right now, we heard from the DA, we heard from the sheriff, and we talked about solutions. And we're going to keep doing that discussion as we make policies and plans to improve.
I'm grateful for all of the partners that have come in today, once again, to show how much Atlanta is a caring community. You know, we have families that are hurting, that they are trying to take care of housing and food and making sure that all family members have safe winter clothing, clean winter clothing. These are brand new coats, and we want the community to know that they don't have to be without. We have food giveaways, and now we are having a coat giveaway for families in need.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Amir Faroqi, Chair of the City Council Zoning Committee. I want to welcome everyone to this meeting of the Zoning Committee on Monday, February 8th, 2021. Hope you all had a lovely weekend and stayed healthy. And I also want to welcome everyone who's tuning in online or over the phone today for this remote meeting. If I could ask our council staff, Ms. Corinne-Lindo, to please do a roll call. We'll do that before we get started.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, I've just been unmuted. We have Councilmember Carla Smith. Ms. Smith? I know she's on the line, Mr. Chair. Councilmember Andre Dickens?
Present.
Councilmember Howard Shook?
Aye.
Councilmember Andrea Boone?
Present.
Councilmember Marcy Collier Overstreet?
Present.
I'll try Councilmember Smith? Mr. Chair, we have a quorum. I believe Ms. Smith is logged in, but trying to call in. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much. If you could also, while you have the mic, please read the remote meeting statement.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. Today's zoning committee meeting will be conducted remotely as advertised and in accordance with Georgia Code Section 50-14-1. The meeting will be conducted in conformance with Robert Rules of Order and the Rules of Council as authorized by the City Code. The public may access the meeting conference bridge toll-free by dialing 877-579-6743 and enter in conference ID number 831-599-1256. This information was also provided on the Friday, February 5th, 2021 public meeting notice. The public may also view the meeting on Channel 26, the Council's homepage at citycouncil.atlanta.ga.gov, Facebook and Twitter pages at ACL Council, and the Council's YouTube channel. Today's meeting agenda was also published and made available on Friday, February 5th via the city's website at atlantacitygA.iqm2.com. In addition, the public is able to submit comments unrelated to zoning items that have or will go before the Zoning Review Board via voicemail at 404-330-6035 yesterday between the hours of 4 and 7 p.m. Any comments received will be played during the public comment portion of this meeting. All persons present on the remote council meeting conference bridge are requested to please mute your phones and speakers. Meeting participants wishing to speak must be acknowledged by the committee chair. Thank you all in advance for your cooperation.
Thank you, Ms. Lindo. Excuse me, before we adopt the agenda, I'll pause for a second to see if Ms. Smith is with us on the line. I know I see her on.
I am. I just have trouble getting in on the phone. It's just a long story, but anyway, I apologize, but I've been here the whole time. It's just that I couldn't talk because I wasn't on the right line. Anyway,
Sure.
user error. Sure. It was just I couldn't talk. I don't know why.
Well, we're glad you're with us, and we have a full house today for our committee meeting. Would like to adopt the agenda, but before I do so, I want to propose one change just to move an item around. Item number G is presentations, reports, and updates. We'll have Commissioner Keene and Josh Humphreys from City Planning to talk to us a little bit about the zoning rewrite process. I know Councilmember Shook and some others raised interest in seeing what the timeline looks like and what we can expect as a committee, but also for our residents. So they'll be giving us a brief report on that. I'd like to move item G, which is presentations and reports, after ordinance for first reading and ordinances for second reading, which will be quick. And so I will just adopt the agenda based on those following changes. If there are any objections, just raise your hand or speak up. I don't think we need a formal vote on this, right, Ms. Linda?
No, Mr. Chair, we do.
Oh, we do? Okay. Well, then please open the vote with the agenda reflecting those changes.
The vote is open, Mr. Chair. One moment. The vote is open, Mr. Chair. The vote is closed. 6 yeas, 0 nays. The agenda has been adopted.
Is Ms. Winslow with us on the line? Do we need to get a voice vote from her?
Mr. Chair, we do not have, she is not on the line.
Okay, great. Terrific. So next item will be the approval of the minutes of the January 25th meeting minutes. If you could please open the vote.
One moment. Mr. Chair, we need a move in a second, please.
Good. I will motion to approve the meeting minutes. Do I have a second?
Second, Overstreet. The vote is open, Mr. Chair. The vote is closed. 6 yeas, 0 nays. The meeting minutes have been approved.
Great. Thank you. So the next item is ordinances for first reading. We have 9, but given that we read them in at the full council meeting, I will move that we accept them and just read them in full at the full council meeting, so we don't have to read them twice. The public will get to hear them in full at our full council meeting. Does that require a vote, Ms. Lindo?
No, madam. No, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you. So we'll move to ordinances for second reading, of which we have 1. And I'll note for the public listening, we had no public comment today, which is why you have not heard any public comment. There were no messages left on our public comment line. So Ms. Holmes, can you read the one item that we have for second reading today?
Good morning. Good morning. Certainly, Mr. Chair. Item number 10-21-00070, U-2101, an ordinance by zoning committee to amend ordinance number 19-01717, which authorized special use permit U-1936, allowing for the transfer of 154,000 square feet of residential development rights for property located at 979 Crescent Avenue, the sending parcel, to property located at 1122 Crescent Avenue, the receiving parcel, so as to extend the time limits for construction and permitting of the receiving properties project and for other purposes. Staff recommendation is approval.
Great. Thank you. This property sits in District 2, so I will move to approve. Do I have a second?
Second, Overstreet.
Thank you, Ms. Overstreet. If you could open the vote.
Mr. Chair, the vote is open. The vote is closed. 6 yeas, 0 nays. That item is favorable.
Thank you. So what normally would be another super quick zoning committee meeting. We'll extend it a little bit today to hear from our Commissioner of City Planning, Tim Keene, and any members of his staff who'd like to talk to us a little bit about the zoning rewrite and where we are on that timeline and what the future will look like. So I'll turn the floor over to Commissioner Keene.
Mr. Chair, thank you. This is Tim Keene. And we have a presentation for you today on Atlanta City Design Housing. In Q&A, happy to answer questions about the zoning rewrite as well. I've got Joshua Humphreys here with me. He's our director of our Office of Housing and Community Development, who will run through some slides. In preparation for that, I just wanted to say two things. First, Atlanta City Design Housing, like all the work associated with Atlanta City Design, this one specifically related to housing in our city, is about better understanding the unique physical characteristics of Atlanta. And during a time when the city is now growing more than it ever has, how we address, in this case, housing in a manner that is commensurate with the unique physical characteristics of the city. We, in Atlanta City Design, we're seeking to clarify the way in which the city can grow in all ways, such that Atlanta's characteristics are protected and accentuated with growth, not that we're working against the physical city that we have. So that's number one. What we're presenting are housing-related recommendations to address the incredible challenge of affordable housing affordability in a growing city in a manner that's appropriate for this specific place. The second thing I'll mention is that we started presenting this work to NPUs in January. We'll continue to do that, and as well as with other community groups, because this is an important conversation. It's upon all Atlantans to participate in it and find the best way to implement what we're recommending. So we'll continue that series of conversations with everyone in the city in preparation for bringing specific legislative proposals to City Council. With that, I'll introduce Joshua Humphreys, who will run through these slides. Josh, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here, Tim. Thanks so much. So I will, hi everyone, I'm Josh Humphreys. I'll run through this slide deck pretty quick so we can answer any questions that you may have for us. So on slide two now, the first thing I'll say about the project, kind of in addition to what Tim mentioned, is that we released this in December, and it uses a platform called Esri Story Maps. And one thing we really like about that is it really allows us to do to kind of approach this in a storytelling way and uses kind of interactive maps and photos and links, and the ability to really allow folks to kind of have a tactile experience with the project. On slide three, you know, one of the things that we've been working, kind of really a lot of public engagement, even digital engagement during COVID world, and using Twitter and other ways to engage with residents around the ideas from the project. Slide four is a photo from the Color of Law. We did a book club on this book in October of this past year, and had well over 100 residents involved. The book is by Richard Rothstein, is about kind of the history of housing policy and kind of intentional segregation of cities by race and class. And it was really a helpful engagement for us around kind of these policies and how do we address our own past in ways that help us to build a better future for the city. On slide five, Tim mentioned Atlanta City Design, which is kind of the guiding kind of framework around the land use and zoning related policies that exist in this project. The other resource that we really draw on is the One Atlanta Housing Affordability Action Plan. And there are quite a few elements in that plan that are for the Department of City Planning. And a lot of those or many of those are included in this, and many of them really have to do with the physical design of the city and the ways in which we can design a city that is more affordable, and it includes more choices for residents kind of across income levels. And so those two combine to really give us Atlanta city design housing. On slide 6, so the purpose of the project is to assess the current state of housing in Atlanta, research the history of housing policy in the city, and the continued impact that history has on us today, and then propose Atlanta-specific solutions to build a healthy and diverse housing ecosystem for Atlanta's future. On slide 7, you'll see our project timeline. So this all really began in 2018 with what at the time was called the Equitable Housing Needs Assessment. We held a series of public engagements all throughout the summer and fall of 2018, really asking residents to engage with us around kind of the state of housing in Atlanta and the particular types of problems that we're dealing with as a city. The main thing that we learned, in addition to some of kind of the census data and kind of the initial analysis about how bad our housing affordability problem is, but we also learned that residents of the city really wanted Atlanta-specific solutions to those problems, not just cookie-cutter solutions that could work in any U.S. city, but really nuanced ones that work for Atlanta. And that sent us down a 12 to 18-month process of doing research on the history of Atlanta, because we felt that in order to really understand solutions that work for Atlanta's future and for our present problems, we needed to understand our past and how we got here. And so we worked around the last year and a half pulling that together. Then we hosted the book club on the color of law in last year. And the project was released in December of 2020. So, we did our first round of public engagement on the front end of this, really collecting kind of information and kind of priorities from residents about how to approach this. And so now we're doing public engagement on this project, started in December and up through right now. So on slide 8, you'll see the city's population growth. And this, in many ways, is one of the core variables that has changed the equation in Atlanta around housing affordability. For 50 years or so, the city had a stagnant and oftentimes declining population. But since 2010, we've had significant population growth, and for the first time in the city's history, we've surpassed 500,000 residents. Slide 9, you'll see that we expect that somewhere around 2050, maybe a little bit after that we'll grow to around 1.2 million residents in the city limits, which is more than double what we have today. At the same time, nearly 60% of the city is zoned exclusionarily for single-family housing. This on slide 10, you'll see a map of this. And this low-density land use works okay when the city wasn't growing in population, but with the city growing significantly in population, it's really running up against it. So in slide 11, you'll see that we're the 316th most densely populated city in the United States, significantly less dense than cities like Monterey Park or Dearborn, Michigan, or many other cities that you can run through in this list. With a density as low as the city has and the kind of the land use pattern that we have right now in Atlanta, that mix of population growth is creating an inelastic housing supply issue where we're not creating enough housing supply to meet the demand in the city, and it's driving up housing costs much faster than it would otherwise. So on slide 13 now, you'll see that inelastic housing supply is having a significant impact on the market, and we've seen a 50% increase in the last decade in the median home sale price in Atlanta. So slide 14, how did we get here? Well, on slide 15, the first thing that we learned is that the city wasn't always the 316th most densely populated in the city in the country. That we once had a much higher population density. In 1940, the city had a population density of around 8,500 people per square mile. By 2018, we're closer to 3,500 people per square mile, so less than half of the density that we had in 1940. On the next slide, you'll see that the 1929 zoning code. We think this is an important zoning code for learning the city's history for a couple of reasons. One, this zoning code was the first one that was adopted by the city of Atlanta, or the first one that was adopted that was not overturned by a state or federal Supreme Court. Prior to 1929, the city had multiple attempts at trying to racialize the zoning code, and it was struck down by the courts time and again. So by 1929, the city had given up in many ways on trying to use zoning code to racially exclude residents, and began using economic exclusion as a proxy for racial exclusion. And this map looks eerily similar to the previous iterations that were racialized, except for now apartment and dwelling houses are separated out, and the red areas the apartments and the light orangish yellow areas are the dwelling houses. The other thing that's interesting about this zoning code is that there was some level of flexibility that was still allowed in the dwelling houses. This was prior to single-family zoning really taking off in the U.S. And so this allowed duplexes by right and other types of kind of second unit, accessory dwelling units, basement apartments, things of the like. So now that the kind of the shift toward economic exclusion through zoning had taken root in the 1920s, on slide 17, you'll see the federal Homeowners Association and the HOLC, these federally backed mortgage programs that come out of the New Deal era, do what the zoning code couldn't, and they use race as a way to cut off access to government-backed mortgages, and say we're going to cut off resources from apartment building areas that are primarily for Black and brown residents, and deny kind of access to those resources. And at the same time, really build a kind of a system designed for single-family detached housing for predominantly and almost sometimes exclusively white communities in the 1930s. And so this kind of builds on to, this is the 1-2 punch. You have exclusionary zoning kind of for economic exclusion, and then you have like racialized federal mortgage programs that begin to segregate the city in very extensive ways. So now to slide 19, this is the redlined areas from the 1930s redlining. On slide 20, you'll see grayed out areas. Those areas are redlined areas that nearly 100 years later either no longer exist, they were destroyed, are still predominantly low income today. Slide 21, the 86% of the redlined areas in the 1930s have either been destroyed or remain predominantly low income. You'll see things like slide number 22 here, that freedom, stadiums and freeways, parks, these, after decades of really cutting off the spigot to federally backed mortgages and access to capital, wealth creation tools from the federal government, these communities that had been kind of deprived of those kind of wealth creation opportunities are then destroyed in many ways through urban renewal projects that also get federal funding in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, like happened around Fulton County Stadium and the freeways. At the same time, these mortgage programs and the zoning code to kind of reinforce this economic exclusion exist to preserve and build wealth in the city's predominantly white communities. So what we're left with then is, in many ways, these have played contributing roles in where we are in slide 24 here, that the city ranks as the worst income inequality in the U.S. This was 2018. Every year we're somewhere kind of near the top of that, and these policies play a significant role in that. On slide 25, you'll see the kind of the ways in which this racial exclusion and economic exclusion that was built into the city's zoning code over the last 100 years has reinforced itself time and again, and really had a significant impact on the city's Black residents, and the value of the home, the value of kind of the ability to, or the kind of percentage to have access to a bachelor's degree. So significant impacts in the city that we have today in many ways was formed by these housing policies over the last century. So policies that we're proposing that are commensurate with Atlanta, that are specific to the city, and that seek to address the ways in which the city has kind of structured itself. So the first thing, kind of going back to Atlanta city design, is that we broke down the city into two distinct typologies that we, and our proposals are based on these. The first is the city design growth areas. Growth areas are your areas of the city like your urban core, your clusters like Buckhead and Greenbrier Mall, and then your corridors like Metropolitan Avenue or Memorial Drive. These areas, we believe, have the highest capacity for growth, and that as we grow there, we'll become a more sustainable city. They're closer to amenities like jobs and transit and other things that are important for thriving cities. The city design conservation areas are the rest of the city in many ways, and these are the areas where the majority of the city's tree canopy exists, where most of the detached residential single-family type of homes exist in the city. And we believe that it's important that these areas stay true to their character and their unique kind of lower density, lower use, lower intensity use type. So on slide 29, the kind of broken down kind of our proposals into two sides. One is to stimulate the development of naturally occurring affordable housing options. One of the challenges that we face in Atlanta right now is that our housing affordability options are, our tools are limited to subsidy tools. And this doesn't allow the market to create moderately priced housing options. And our proposals in this section are really focused on the ways in which we can create kind of, amend regulations to allow the market to create more more affordable housing options across income spectrums, right? Like we need deeply affordable options. We also need moderately affordable options so that we have options for people across the income spectrum, and then we can have kind of diverse options throughout the city for residents. So the first of those proposals is to end the exclusionary single-family zoning that exists in 60% of the city, and to do so by allowing an additional dwelling unit on these properties citywide. And this is, the goal of this really is to kind of retain the kind of historic character of single-family neighborhoods, but allow these properties the flexibility to add subtle additional units, right? So to take the picture here on slide 30, it's the, to be able to convert this basement garage into a basement apartment, kind of the flexibility to do that both would allow homeowners the kind of the choice whether or not they wanted to kind of add a secondary unit and flexibility in their homes, but also by nature of the type of unit it is, create a more affordable option for residents, so that a basement apartment tends to be less expensive than the single family home that it sits in. And so now neighborhoods that only have single family homes can create more income diversity in their neighborhoods in subtle ways that don't detract from kind of the historic character of these neighborhoods. So slide 31 is an example of one where the second unit is up on the top floor. Slide 32 is a newer development, and this is the second unit is kind of a smaller and recessed behind the primary structure, but still kind of in the general pattern of the neighborhood. And then on slide 33, this is an example of a basement apartment on a corner lot, and the second unit then is a basement apartment. So these are subtle. They still look primarily like single family homes, but they provide kind of nuanced opportunities for additional dwelling units. On slide 34, we estimate that if 15% of the current single-family properties in the city added a second unit, we're talking about somewhere around 11,500 new units that could be created in the city, and these units tend to be more moderately priced units in the market. So now I'm on slide 35. The accessory dwelling unit, we're looking to expand kind of the way in which that works in the city right now. We allowed accessory dwelling units in R4s and R4A in addition to R5 in 2018. There are a couple things that we'd like to do to make them work a little bit better than they are right now. One of which is to make some kind of modest adjustments to kind of the way in which they're kind of functionally permitted. But the other more kind of tangible thing that we'd like to do with these is to allow them to create home ownership opportunities. And this serves twofold. Right now, if you're a single-family homeowner and you want to build an ADU in your backyard, access to capital is a real challenge. So we're only seeing these oftentimes in the more affluent neighborhoods of the city that have access to large amounts of cash up front, because traditional construction loans, at least in the Atlanta market, have not caught up with the new allowances for this. The other challenge is that they can only be rented right now. And so we're proposing that, and on slide 36, we're proposing that the ADU could be fee simple subdivided from the primary structure. and be sold as its own home ownership opportunity. A few reasons that we think this is important. One is that it would create the ability kind of for the homeowner to kind of collateralize the property and then have access to then get more traditional loans in order to build an ADU. It also would give them flexibility if they wanted to own it and rent it or to sell it off, kind of the most flexibility for their home. And then from a potential homeowner side, it creates a more affordable home ownership opportunity than would otherwise be available in a given neighborhood. If it's a $700,000 single-family home on the front, the ADU that's 700 square feet in someone's backyard is going to be much more affordable of an ownership opportunity. In Atlanta's market, we don't have a lot of affordable ownership opportunities in the city, which we would create. The other thing that I think is important to note about the fee simple subdivision is that fee simple means that it would require to it basically would require that the ADU have to act like an ADU, so have the size requirements and otherwise of the ADU, so that it would not look out of space with the rest of the city or the rest of the neighborhood. We're also proposing that they would be expanded into R1 through R3 areas in the city. Right now, they're only allowed in R4 and R5s. And a couple more, I noticed the time, so I'll try and run through these. Small apartment buildings near transit. So these small apartments, you're talking 4, 6, 8 unit apartment buildings. We're proposing that we could expand the use of these near transit centers. So half a mile to transit, that these would be by right allowances. So you could have small apartments that are nuanced and still fit neighborhood character, but allow us to densify near our transit centers. One other tool is to remove parking requirements of residential parking requirement minimums all citywide. This can be very costly to developers, and that cost gets relayed into the renters and the condo owners. And so removing these parking requirements can allow us to really drive down costs for affordable housing development. On slide 41 now, so this is to look at rezoning the growth areas to allow more density growth here, and looking at that in nuanced ways. Slide 42, we're proposing to expand housing and create a housing innovation lab where we can kind of stimulate kind of the market to develop nuanced housing types that fit with the neighborhood character, but also add kind of settled density and more affordable housing options. And then slide 43, the last few that I'll go through here is really looking at dedicated affordable housing and how that works citywide. First thing is to expedite the development of publicly owned vacant land for affordable housing. Slide 44, this is a lot on Trinity Avenue, which is one that we are looking at potentially developing, but it's an example of a lot of other lots in the city, both in the growth areas and conservation areas, that we want to look at, how do we expedite the development of this land for affordable housing throughout the city. Slide 45 is the West Side Affordability Overlay, which currently is working its way through the MPU systems right now. And then slide 46, this is about how do we equitably distribute our dedicated, and by dedicated I mean regulatory through something like exclusionary zoning or subsidized. How do we ensure that this affordable housing gets distributed throughout the city in equitable ways? And so we looked at kind of dividing the city into, looking at the 9 high school clusters and then weighting them based on growth areas, because we think that most of the dedicated affordable housing makes sense in growth areas since they're typically larger apartment buildings. So on slide 47, you'll see kind of how that weighting breaks down. And, our goal with this is to really ensure that long-term affordability exists throughout the city and in the highest growth areas of the city. Slide 48, you'll see our proposal for the Urban Enterprise Zone program. Goal here is to create affordability, flexibility citywide. Right now, the Urban Enterprise Zone program is only allowed in the magenta areas you see on your map. We're proposing that we have flexibility citywide, and this was included as the part of the state legislative package this year for the General Assembly. So that is my last proposal. Tim, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay. Mr. Chair, thank you for giving us a chance to present this and extend your zoning committee meeting. We're happy to answer questions about this at this time.
Terrific. Thank you, Josh and Commissioner Keene. Would you all be able to articulate the website that you have that actually has a really in-depth, I think, mirror to this presentation that's very well done. I think it's important for the public to be able to access it and read it. And I have a couple other comments and questions before we get to questions from council members on the committee.
Sure, I can do that. So it'd be the easiest way to access the website is bit.ly/ACD housing. Again, that's bit.ly/ACD housing.
Great, thank you. So, like a lot of American cities, we have more people that want to live in the city than housing exists, and so this conversation is one that's overdue, and glad that we're having it. At some point, the rubber's got to meet the road, and we got to vote in a new zoning code. And I know there's a lot of elements that will cause people angst and anxiety as we think about how to increase density. I represent the densest council district in the city. It's the smallest. It's probably grown a lot because it's expanded upwards, Midtown, or Fourth Ward, et cetera. But there are other parts of the city that are largely single-family tract and lovely in their own right in that way. And so I think one of the currents we'll be surfing as a council, as individual council members, but also as a body, will be that tension between how folks like things now and kind of how we're going to have to grow. So look forward to that conversation. One piece of that, of course, is the accessory dwelling unit conversation. And so, Commissioner King, can you just give us an update on where that is and working its way through MPU, comment and review, when you expect us to address it here at committee and the full council?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an important issue. A couple things in answering your question to mention. One is that since we adopted the accessory dwelling unit ordinance a couple of years ago in some of our zoning districts, we've learned some things from that experience. One of them is that building a second unit, an accessory unit, can be pretty difficult. It's not easily achieved, and so part of what we're trying to do is learn from that experience and make the addition of a second unit more easily accomplished for more people, because this is very much about having just people in Atlanta that live here have the opportunity to build affordable housing units, to build second units that are more affordable. This is not at all foreign to our city. It's something that we have in most every neighborhood in Atlanta is a single family house with a second unit that provides income for the owner, but also provides an affordable unit. So it's something that's very important, we think, in terms of Atlanta not completely excluding people from market rate housing, because what we're talking about is not subsidized housing. We're talking about housing that's built by the market, by people, and doesn't involve a subsidy. And you're providing housing for people that are making, you all hear this kind of discussion all the time. So I'll say it, 60 to 80% of very median income without subsidy, which is hugely beneficial to the city. And so in terms of where we are, Mr. Chair, we're working on the legislation right now, but we've been meeting with NPUs so far, and other community groups, not just NPUs, but importantly NPUs, to make the presentation essentially we're making to you today. And we'll continue that discussion. And we won't present legislation to City Council specific to accessory dwelling units until we've, had a full and satisfactory public conversation with people all over Atlanta, such that we bring you an ordinance that you will support and adopt. And we've got a little bit of work still to do there. We've got more public meetings, more people to meet with in order to get there. So I don't have a specific timeline on that legislation. We've been focused on basically presenting and discussing this information with residents of the city, seeking ways to, optimize it and bring you something that many in this community can support.
Great. I have one more question, then I want to turn it over to Councilmember Shook, who's in the queue. Significant chunks of the city permit ADUs now. Does the department have an inventory on how many ADUs have actually been built? Because I'll tell you, in my part of town, that it's largely ADU friendly. I still see very few of them.
Right.
There's carriage houses and basement apartments, so you don't see a lot of freestanding ADUs. I'm just kind of curious if there's an inventory and if there's been any discussion for any kind of financing mechanism that the city could provide to help folks build them.
Josh, if you have the number of ADUs, you're right, Mr. Chair, that even though we've permitted these for a couple of years in quite a few neighborhoods, we've had very few of them built. That's why I started by saying it's difficult to build them for a variety of reasons. Some of them having to do with, building a second structure on your property can be a challenge. The design of it, the financing of it, as you say, we've discussed ways to help with financing. We've looked at other cities that have done similar programs to help support the construction of accessory units. So all of that is part of what we're exploring and expect to pursue, such that we can achieve some significant percentage of these units in the city. I mean, 15% of the single-family lots would be a significant achievement. We have much less than that currently. But importantly, with this legislation that we want to bring to you, Council Member, is that this would give you other options for how you add a second unit. Right now, you're pretty constrained. You can build a second structure on your property within the constraints of the zoning, and that is your option. This is suggesting that we open this up to other forms of second units, whether it's a basement apartment or an addition to your house or the renovation of your house, such to add a secondary unit, that we open up that kind of flexibility, hoping that would enable more people to construct these second units. So that would be a significant change in helping more people build these units. Because you're right, Mr. Chair, there's not been a whole lot of them built. Do you know that number, Josh? How many ADUs have been built in the city since?
Yeah. So we've seen, I think, a little under 60 in the 2 years since the ADU ordinance was passed. So yeah, a pretty small amount. And we did a lot of work with other cities that have done this, and the fact that it's detached is the only thing allowed is a real thing that's holding us back. I think we've learned from other cities the vast majority of additional units that are built in most places have been kind of additions or conversions because they're so much cheaper than building an additional structure. And so, that's what those policies and the fee simple were both kind of aimed at creating kind of better kind of financial opportunities, because the cost of development has been a real inhibitor for this in the past.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Shook, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple questions. And I appreciate having read the report. I appreciate the presentation now, and it's just interesting in a way that chagrins me that what it is you're trying to do is so totally different from the way you told the public, here's what we're going to do. And it's up right there on page 30, and exclusionary single-family zoning. So my question is, was that just a horrible editorial mistake or a Freudian slip?
Well, I don't think it's either, actually, Councilmember Shook. I mean, what we're talking about is not eliminating single-family neighborhoods.
And exclusionary single-family zoning, Commissioner. I mean,
Councilmember Shook, it says end exclusionary single-family zoning, not single-family neighborhoods. I mean, we can have single-family neighborhoods, and do have many of them that have small apartment buildings in them. We're not proposing that. What we're proposing in these second units. So that is ending exclusionary single-family zoning, not neighborhoods. I mean, the single-family neighborhoods we have in Atlanta clearly are what make this city. And we're not suggesting that single-family neighborhoods be eliminated. It's the government policy and regulation that has been imposed on single-family neighborhoods, that you have this incredible restriction, which is a relatively new endeavor that government created to make single-family zoning so exclusionary. So that is, yeah. So I don't think it's either. I think it's a perfectly honest statement.
Okay, I mean, I'm trying to give you the opportunity to be honest. You've experienced the blowback. You wouldn't wordsmith any of this any differently.
Well, I think I've said what I think about that, Councilmember. We were being honest that zoning has become the government way of excluding. This is not at all.
Right.
This is not at all suggesting that single-family neighborhoods be eliminated.
All right. I'm honestly trying to help you out, which leads me to this. First of all, I found the historical aspects in the report fascinating. And here's what happened when, and here's what appeared to drive a lot of these kind of decisions and conclusions that have created really bad outcomes that persist to this day. What sort of disappoints me is there was no kind of acknowledgement that over the last 40 years, thanks to the neighborhood and NPU system, every zoning and land use change has come from the grassroots up. So, I mean, here you are trying to kind of use as justification this kind of, his sort of unending racial injustice as creating all these bad outcomes, really kind of without acknowledging that this is going around to all the NPUs and then to their elected officials for review and comment. And God knows politicians would make crappy planners and planners make crappy politicians. I would just like to get your comment on that.
Well, I think, Councilmember, this report is really, it's a public service announcement as much as anything else. This Atlanta is growing in a manner that it hasn't ever before, period. The city now, for the first time in its history, has more than 500,000 people living. The previous high was 496,000 in 1970. All indications are, and we can expect, while there will be times when growth is slowing for economic conditions such as the one that we're in the midst of right now, the trend will be substantial growth within the city of Atlanta. And if we are to address housing affordability in a compelling way, as we hear in every corner of this city, whether you're in Buckhead in the north, whether you're in the southwest, southeast, doesn't matter where, there is incredible interest in ensuring that the people that work in the city can live in the city. So we are here to say, these are the things that we must consider as a community if we are to build and have more affordable housing, period. And this is what happens in cities, is when you grow in the manner that we're now starting to grow, the market rate, what we call naturally occurring affordable housing that does not include government subsidy, goes away. And eventually what you're left with is subsidized housing as your only affordable housing. And you see it in so many cities. And we want to avoid that. We have a relatively small window in order to do that. As we speak with the NPUs, have started speaking with them, will continue to speak with them, where there are ideas to improve this or change this, we welcome them. And we want the best ideas as to how to address this incredibly challenging issue for Atlanta. Not just Atlanta, every city, but Atlanta in this case. And we feel that this is a modest, Atlanta-specific set of proposals that we want more of from the NPUs. And that's how we approach these conversations, council member. It's not that we figured everything out. It's just that we've done a lot of study of this, and we feel it's important for you to discuss this and consider it and confront it, and we do that as a community. And so that's why we'll take our time with the NPUs, council member, and make sure that we've had all the discussions we must, as I said earlier, in order to bring you something that you can support.
All right, I appreciate it. A fascinating discussion. I never shy away from those needed to use. So I appreciate the fact that you decided, hey, wait, here's some stuff we need to open up and put on the table, and nature will take its course. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for being long.
Thank you.
Chair Faroki, are you ready for me? Councilmember Overstreet?
Oh, sorry, I'm sitting here talking out loud. 1 second, Councilmember. I said, thank you, Councilmember Shook. I just wanted to remind the committee that, as Commissioner Keene indicated earlier, that there's nothing before us on this matter yet. It's continuing to be socialized. If we need to, we can have a work session, but at this point, I'd like to see it work its way through neighborhood and NPU comment before we as a council start to wrestle with it. But with that, Councilmember Overstreet, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Commissioner Keene, I have a couple observations and a couple questions. I am, first of all, I do have angst. Like watching it literally, the entire presentation, all I could think about was broad strokes. And I know that you've worded the presentation as having a personal Atlanta touch as opposed to the United States, but Atlanta is not all one. Even though we have one Atlanta, we have different personalities and different districts and different sides of town. So this feels like a very broad stroke to me. I know it's the very beginning of the conversation for us about this particular legislation, but I do have issues with quite a few of the slides. I would have to take a moment and look at them, more in depth and really come up with, examples of where the issues would be. But for today, I would like to say, first of all, we speak often about the fact that the NPU system is not used the way we'd like for it to be used. I mean, you have a district like mine of 40,000 residents, and, one NPU will have, 20 people there. One may have 40 or 50, but out of so many residents, that's a very small amount of people to actually be taking this kind of broad stroke to. And in these legacy neighborhoods, we don't even want to get into the digital divide. I would absolutely need for this to be something that was circulated almost like the census, door to door. It's very intense, and it would really to take away single family zoning. You're saying not single family lives, but zoning specifically through a broad stroke across the entire city would definitely have an impact on legacy neighborhoods. Definitely. And it's something that at first sight, I feel that my district would not be supportive of, but I would have to look at it look at it in depth. Please, let's talk more about the engagement. I've only heard MPU, MPU, MPU. Or I went to the site that you all sent me to, the Bitly, and I'm able to do that. But we have so many people that are not in District 11 that will not be able to readily go to that website and really digest all of that information. Some don't even have email addresses. So how are you explaining that to Aunt Betty that has been in her home, in one home that she has the deed to for 50 years, that her next door neighbor could put another house on her property that could be right up to her property line, and there's no restriction about parking all of a sudden? Like, how does that work? So we're going to definitely have to have work sessions. We have to have in-depth conversations, and we absolutely have to have more engagement than just the NPU system. I just welcome rounds and rounds and rounds of engagement in so many different platforms that, it's really going to take a lot to educate everyone on the option of having this type of zoning or lack of zoning in our city. So those are just I thought I had a question, but I'm at the point where I don't even have questions yet. Those are just my thoughts right off, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember.
All right.
Thank you, Councilmember Overstreet. Appreciate your comments and reflections. I think it reflects a lot of passion around this issue. I recall from our newly elected officials training that we all went to, at least one of the more recent council members at the University of Georgia. The only thing I remember for 2 days of seminars and classes was someone got up from South Georgia, some city official, and said, "There's nothing that will pack a gymnasium or a church basement like a zoning dispute," and that has proven to be true in my short tenure, and it will be the case, I think, as we work our way through these elements of a potential rewrite or these new kind of policies we may be considered or may be considering to vote on. So look forward to a continued robust discussion. This committee will do its best to be a platform for that debate, whether through work sessions, community engagement, or otherwise. But appreciate Councilmember Overstreet and Shook weighing in, and Commissioner Keene, your time and Josh's time as well. And before we close out, I just do want to pause. Any other council members have comments or questions on this topic before we adjourn for the day? And barring none, I also open the floor for any announcements that people have. And if there are none, we will adjourn for the day. So thank you all for a good committee meeting today. Look forward to more in-depth conversation. And barring no other comments, I move to adjourn.
All right. Thank you.
Second.
Thank you all.
Thank you.